Hey everybody, this is Dr. Shelby Blankenship with the MMOA ICE Division. I'm one of your TAs, and I am going to be talking today about bed mobility and how it is the lost transfer. I think this is one that probably a lot of people kind of always know that it's important, but don't always utilize the functionality of it when they're doing their assessments, regardless if that's in acute care, SNF rehab, home health, and outpatient. So I'm just going to go into a discussion of why we need to focus on this and make sure that it's at least part of our assessment to see if it's an issue or an opportunity for this patient to get even more independent in the home or in the hospital, depending on where they're at. So first off, when I talk about bed mobility, I'm going to be discussing rolling side to side, obviously prone to supine works as well, and then supine to sit and sit to supine. As a former acute care therapist, this was one that we did a ton, especially people who were post-op. That tended to be like the biggest struggle post-back surgeries, and especially with our stroke and spinal cord rehabilitation. This is one where I feel like therapists are either one or two ways. They are either the one who absolutely manhandles trying to get that patient up because they're so concerned on getting them off their back, or B, they have the patient really struggle and make sure that they can do it to the most independent part of their functionality. So I think there needs to be a little bit of a bridge there, especially in acute care, making sure that we are tailoring the patient to be successful, but not just manhandling them to do the more sexy stuff of doing sitting up, standing, walking, etc. So some ideas that I wanted to go through was to start with just rolling. Make sure that this is something that the patient is set up for success for. Sometimes, depending on the bed or plinth that you have in your clinic or in your hospital, you want to have that thing on max inflate because it makes it a little bit of a harder surface. Unless they're going home to a really nice foam topper, sometimes that makes it extremely hard to roll in bed. So just kind of keep those things in mind, but really using that head, neck, and trunk rotation, trying to get somebody over from side to side is super helpful. I always tell people to bend the opposite knee that they are going to be rolling towards. So if I'm rolling to the left, I'm going to be bending my right knee, punching that right arm up to the sky and trying to use that momentum to roll me over. As a therapist, making sure that we're hugging around that scapula and not around their neck, really trying to set them up for success to make sure that A, we don't cause an injury, but B, that we allow them that independence of rolling. That's something that we do so often when we're sleeping, and when you don't have any comorbidities or issues with that, it's no problem. But when you do, it can lead to a lot of issues if you're not rolling consistently. And I'm sure we all know them. Pressure sores galore is never fun, and it can be really hard, especially if your mobility is impaired. So really making sure that their rolling capacity is at a good capacity. So something that I used to do and still do even in the outpatient setting is time people on their capacity for rolling. You can do going from left to right, prone to supine, supine to prone. All of that is great, not only from a bed mobility standpoint, but eventually from a floor recovery standpoint as well. Just making sure that they have that full capacity. Then you can kind of bridge into going into that supine to sit. One of the biggest things with supine to sit that tends to be a limiter is people's trunk stability, and they tend to want to like grab onto you because they can get their legs off, but getting their trunk up is really difficult. And depending on their size and shape, it can be even more cumbersome for when you're trying to help them. So using, that hospital bed, if you need to raise that head of the bed up so that they can practice going from that sideline to sitting up and gradually lowering that. Same thing in like an outpatient, home health, inpatient rehab setting. You can always add like plinths or pillows, something probably a little bit more firm for them to push off of so they can practice more and more gradual range of motion of going from sideline to sitting. Another thing that we want to think about, especially with this population, is orthostatic hypotension. So keeping our eyes on, are they having that dizziness? Are they having any of those symptoms? And being able to screen for that and being able to make sure that we have a good treatment session set up for success so that they're not constantly passing out on us. I don't know about y'all, but that is super not fun when that is a constant thing going on. And I know it's especially not fun for the client. So trying to keep that in mind when we're practicing those things is super helpful. But one nice thing too with adding the rolling from supine to sit is you get nice vestibular input. So a lot of our clients have very limited vestibular input, if any, and they tend to have the most dizziness with those. So making sure that we're working on that cervical range of motion, we're getting that vestibular input, and adding some speed or maybe some weight to it and having it timed is really nice. Another thing I wanted to check on is when going from sit to supine. Now, usually with this one, the trunk is not our problem. It is our lower extremities, that hip flexor tends to just really, really struggle with some of our clients to actually get those legs up into the bed. Most of the time, especially like in acute care, I would have them go to like side lying and then practice like kicking up their legs and back up. But I will say there is so much benefit of working on like that hip marching, but working on hip marching over a barrier when they're sitting up, because that is very similar to what they're going to need to be able to get their legs back up into the bed. It's not that simple, just like straight up in front of you. It's that more like side to side, kind of like when you're doing like a car transfer, getting in and out of the car, that type of hip mobility, as well as from a rotation standpoint and a flexion extension standpoint, is super, super nice to work on. So one of the ways that I really like doing this is either with a parallel bar or a dumbbell, depending on how much hip flexion that they have, and getting that to where they are literally practicing almost making this square going up to laterally and back down so that they can work on that range of motion, and it kind of lubricates those joints and it feels really nice. So rolling side to side, we'll time. Supine to sit, we'll time. And sit to supine, we will also time. And then sometimes we'll make it into a circuit for all three. So sometimes, like I've done this with like an EMOM style, we'll have them roll side to side, say 5 times within 1 minute, then they rest the rest of the minute. And then we practice supine to sit, or maybe just side lying to sit, depending on, how symptomatic they are or where their strengths are at and where their weaknesses are. Then we might do the opposite side of side lying to sit. And then we can always finish with going sit to supine, doing that full range of motion. This is so nice to have, not only from an acute care standpoint, because you can get that full use of that bed. And I mean, it's so helpful for the caregivers, the nurses. I mean, this is one of those things that people really, really need help with. Most of the time, the nursing staff's not always getting people up into the bathroom. It's just getting them repositioned in the bed, especially if they're a larger individual or have a lot of comorbidities where they can't be super helpful. That is one of those things that the more we practice it, the more we cue them, that blocked practice, you're only going to set them up for success. And then going into more of the home health and outpatient setting, this is one that I screen all of my clients, whether they know it or not, is how they can get on and off the plinth or your high-low table. Because if they're really struggling getting on and off that high-low table, they're probably really struggling getting in and out of bed on a daily basis. Now, hopefully they're not like sleeping in bed all day and going in and out, where they're taking naps all the time, just from a slight sleep hygiene standpoint. But if they are having a lot of exhaustion just with that bed mobility, that their spouse or caregiver is having to help a lot with the dressing, having to help a lot with the sitting. Like they're not really being set up for success. That 1 rep max threshold is getting lower and lower and lower and lower throughout the day because the bed mobility took so much out of them. So that's why I always practice that, not only in the acute setting, but also in the outpatient home health setting, to make sure I understand what their capacity is from the start of their day to the end of the day. So, going through bed mobility, going through that sit to stand and gait, if that's applicable, is great, but really harping on that bed mobility to make sure they have full success getting their day started. Because if we can't get bed mobility, we're probably not doing super hot on the sit to stands and gait either. But bed mobility really allows for that full full body, as far as like you're using upper extremities, using your neck range of motion, using the vestibular system, using the lower extremities in the trunk, trying to get all that combined. Because again, it's going back to, it's just like floor recovery. So just kind of bridging that gap of, hey, if we can get you in and out of bed easier, we're going to be able to get you on and off the floor a lot easier as well. So I just want to I hope that was somewhat helpful. I am one who super harps on bed mobility. I think it's one of those areas that we could use more and more clinicians making sure they're screening during all their sessions. And it could be as simple as like getting in and out of the plinth, like we talked about earlier, or their bed mobility if they're in the acute care inpatient rehab SNF setting. And the nice part is if you're in home health, you can actually see in their actual bed, hopefully, what their capacity is and maybe give them a little bit of extra cues or structure. Sometimes they have some of those beds that are just super, like you have to pole vault into them, or sometimes it's so low that they are struggling, sitting up all the way, or they might need a handrail or any of those kinds of things. So I hope, you can use that to help with from a making your short-term and long-term goals from a time perspective. You can use that for objective data, but also just from an assist level standpoint. I know the caregivers and the patient will probably be super grateful to be more independent with bed mobility. So last thing I wanted to just go over is that we have 3 live classes coming this weekend. May 20th, 21st, we have one in Phoenix, Arizona, one in Simi Valley, California, and one in Charlotte, North Carolina. So if you haven't gotten your tickets yet and want to join us, please do. I know we would be so happy to see y'all. But other than that, I hope y'all have a great rest of your day and make sure that you practice bed mobility with all your clients. Thanks.